One morning I woke up, scratched my balls and eyes. I looked into the mirror and got a big surprise. I don't know who this person is, but I've seen his face before. A face I don't wanna have to face. I don't think I like me anymore.
I'd rather not direct any unnecessary hatred towards people in general. It takes too much of my time if I were to try and dox people that I don't like, and it would take too much of other people's times if they were to do the same. That being said, I'd still want to not dislike them, so I'm here to make it apparent from the start that I am extending an olive branch and not just farming views off of drama. You can hold me accountable and say that I'm being an asshole in the comments. I completely welcome it. With all that said, I don't like EFAP. Most of the creators make decent content, but their videos would not be as good as they were if they weren't edited down to cut down on fluff. I don't like some of their opinions on things, especially with the recent God of War stuff, but let's not get into that. This video isn't really about them, it's more about their effect on the film review community. The EFAP community tends to be very unrelenting towards the people they cover. This leads some of the people who they cover to be close to criticism and not change because of it. I definitely have seen my fair share of people who just agree with their takes without even having watched the piece of media that they criticize. So when I saw a video titled "The Destruction of Movie YouTube," I was a bit intrigued, and when I finished the video, I was disappointed. It starts off with Organized Chaos describing the landscape of movie review YouTube, and points to channels like Jeremy Johns, Chris Stuckman, and Red Letter Media. I wouldn't have much of a contention with him showing these reviewers from the early 2010s or late 2000s, but then he shows YMS. I like YMS, but it's kind of awkward to acknowledge him and not I Hate Everything. Not to mention some of the other big channels at the time, such as literally everybody under Channel Awesome, who more than likely had a huge influence on the EFAP likes. If I go and say, "What the hell were they thinking?" you know damn well who I'm quoting. It just honestly comes off as him not knowing a lot about movie review YouTube back in the day and the community surrounding it, looking more towards the normie type channels. But since this is a scripted video as opposed to something off the cusp like EFAP, he should have done a lot more research, giving him a lot more evidence. Chaos then says that these channels have diminished in popularity before he shows a bundle of nitpicks that either meander or are misdirected, which, assuming that they had the entire context, is good criticism. But then he says something very interesting.
Give Critical Drinker some credit. He will sometimes do a review of something like Everything Everywhere All at Once and give you an honest take.
A film critic praised a movie that everybody jerked off harder than Redditors on December 1st? How honest, how candid. He then says Critical Drinker rags on Gen Z in this video, which, well, yeah, that would be an honest opinion. It has nothing to do with the review, but it's hard to say that it's not dishonest, since many people from differing generations tend to hate other generations. In fact, with the previous clips, regardless of how disorganized they are, see what I did there? I'm pretty sure that all of them are their honest opinions. In fact, after he makes this claim, he gives evidence against it by showing ragging on his channel. Now, I can see there being a pull in having an opinion that goes against the grain, like saying that Obi-Wan is a bad show despite the fact that it has high ratings from critics and audiences. But what monetary incentive does he have to make fun of your not yet dead channel? Unless you banged his wife or something, I couldn't see any reason for him not to do it unless he genuinely felt the way he did. He pulls more views than your videos do, so he's obviously not attracting your audience as a form of bait. Even if you think he's being a bit stupid in his criticism of you, it's hard to say that he's not believing those things he says. Another thing to keep in mind is that EFAP covered Red Letter Media saying Kenobi is so bad that it's good, something which they didn't take too kindly to. So it's more than likely the case that it is their opinion that Kenobi is bad. On the subject of dishonest, Rags' interpretation of why Kenobi lets himself be killed by Vader, it's exactly that, an interpretation. Being charitable to Organized Chaos here and saying that he gave the entire context of the Rags clip, it looks like Rags is trying to prove a point that Kenobi is willing to bend the truth, which is 100% true, since he says that Anakin Skywalker is dead. So even though I disagree with Rags using this piece of evidence in particular here, his conclusion is still very true. So calling someone's opinion embarrassing is a no-no, gotcha. But calling somebody's opinion dishonest is fair game? If there were any indication that they'd actually believe these shows and movies to be good at the time they made these reviews, I'd like to see it. But this paints Chaos in a worse light than Rags, since Rags calling him embarrassing or an idiot implies that he doesn't necessarily know what he's doing. Whereas you calling Rags dishonest implies a level of malice to it. Another little side point is that he shows a Warhammer YouTuber whose entire channel is being anal about lore and cause and effect. So yeah, he's a lot more concerned about consistency rather than character arcs or shot composition. He then claims that the Critical Drinker devolves his content into talking about politics instead of being an actual review. The problem with this is that he doesn't give the receipts. I know because I personally saw the Batman review, and he only allots like 2 minutes to it out of a 9-minute review. And that's not even the conclusion of the video, so you can't even say it ends on that note. Also, I have a criticism of the Drinker in this clip, where he says that,
"If I was a cynical man, I'd say it's kind of interesting that the rich, corrupt scumbags targeted by the Riddler all happen to be straight, white, middle-aged men, but hey, I guess that's just a total coincidence."
My problem with this is that he calls them white instead of filthy dagos like they are. This would be a very important criticism of the plot that I myself have. It's very obvious that the Guineas run the city, especially looking at the atmosphere. So it weakens the ending twist, which, in my opinion, should have only been Thomas Wayne fueling money into the crime families. Back to the video, this makes Organized Chaos look like a hypocrite for complaining about nitpicking when he's doing the exact same thing with Critical Drinker videos. He gets one small segment from the video and pretends that it's either the conclusion or the majority of the video. He also lumps in Ben Shapiro with the anti-SJW movie reviews, which is extremely weird, and an uncharitable person would come to the conclusion that he's trying to lump in the anti-SJW community with the alt-right so that he can say that they are usherers of fascism, or he can call them neo-Nazi pundits, poisoning the well either way. But I'm gonna just say that he only sees the trending stuff on YouTube, nothing under 100k matters kind of mentality. He claims that all these channels bash women, colors, and other minorities, and uses the worst clips to bring up from Nerdrotic. The first one, Nerdrotic is complaining that the character is different from the source material, not the fact that she was a woman in the first place. In the second one, he's complaining that the hero of the show got sidelined to make way for another show in the increasingly diluted MCU, instead of being the focus of the final episode of his own series, which is apparent with Nerdrotic putting a lot of emphasis on the word titular. Fucking breathed into his mic like he was groping his Ahsoka mousepad at the time. The final one is the most egregious, because he's complaining not about the characters, but the writer of an article not writing about female characters. He complains because they should know that Wonder Woman just came out, considering how much money it grossed, and know that the MCU has Black Widow. I would argue that he, as well as a lot of other people who would be considered anti-SJWs, wanted a Black Widow movie more than they wanted a Captain Marvel movie, because they wanted to see more insight in her character. Granted, these criticisms may be absolutely stupid. I think that the Moon Knight one is absolutely stupid, but it's not rooted in hatred of women, it's rooted in nerds being nerds and not wanting things to change, for better or worse. You claim to have an extensive knowledge of comic books, so remember what happened when they changed Dick into Jason, or the fact that they brought back Logan instead of keeping X-23 as a new Wolverine. People hate change, for better or worse. I think that his criticism of Galadriel being a dude, despite the fact that she becomes a very feminine person later on, is also really stupid. Not because it brings up women, but because the show itself is a prequel, and the point of a prequel is to show what a character was and how they turned into someone different. Anakin from Star Wars, Big Boss from Snake Eater, Dante from the Devil May Cry series. Garterbelt did that in Penny and Stocking before Gynax died. But the baffling thing about this is I think he should have brought up the Critical Drinker clips here, because although I believe that cutting out a little 30-second clip from a 12-minute video is very bad faith framing, there aren't any hints of plot criticism in those clips, and though I believe them to be typically concise, they do stick out like a sore thumb in all of his content. He states that Red Letter Media and CinemaSins are the main points of inspiration for these types of people, even though I Hate Everything and That Guy with the Glasses both existed and are very popular to this day, especially due to the fact that a good chunk of I Hate Everything's videos are talking about discussion and the fan base around media. I think that this is also more than likely the case, since if they were leaning into CinemaSins demographic, then they would use their "it's just satire bro, get out of jail free" cards a lot more frequently in videos that aren't entirely framed as jokes. The only ones I can think of that were even around this community are JXE, who retired his label as being a CinemaSins ripoff channel, and No Bullshit, who just kind of fell off the face of the earth one day. One of the lines that confused me was him saying,
They eventually tried saying they're just a parody channel and shouldn't be taken seriously, but they still largely were, no matter how valid their sins were.
The people who have seriously serious takes were taken seriously. CinemaSins is a rabbit hole in and of itself, but all you need to know is that one of them expressed the purpose of the channel was to call out Hollywood on their rapacious bullshit. Either way, this line is very poorly worded. I can't tell whether he means to say that CinemaSins is a serious channel despite the fact that it has some parody elements to it, or that people take them seriously despite the fact that they're a parody channel, or some amalgamation of both of them. Manga Common did a pretty good video about CinemaSins, and he's where I'm getting most of my receipts about them, so check out that. He states that his reviews are not meticulous breakdowns of media, but what's egregious is the fact that his own videos reviewing Critical Drinkers videos exceed the runtime of the subject, almost doubling or even tripling the runtime. I can't say much for the other episode-by-episode channels, but the other named one, Nerdrotic, has videos that are the inverse ratio of this, typically being 20 to 25 minutes, discussing an hour-long episode. So saying that they're meticulous and don't go into something wanting to enjoy it is very conflicting. But Griff-chan, he only goes into disliking them because he knows they engender a crowd of people who are negative towards downtrodden peoples and things he likes. How do you think that crowd operates when watching something made by Disney? I refuse to believe that he is unable to have the ability to understand where these people are coming from. On hating something to milk views, another pot and kettle situation. He's responding to rags multiple times in order to get as many views as possible from a bad situation, but he makes videos on a daily basis. He promotes his podcast with one of the draws being that he'll be calling out these types of people while saying it's for his love of movies as opposed to his hatred for these people. This heavily damages his claim that these people go into movies without even wanting to like them. Since being negative for the sake of something you love is something that he values, there's no real reason why other people can't do the exact same thing. This is why people in the EFAP community, or even people who don't like the EFAP community and only hear about the drama secondhand like myself, were very disappointed in your channel. He claims that this trend in movie reviewers give way for the anti-woke crowd, which grew at an exponential rate.
Wrong!
If you want to have your channel truly take off in 2019, what you need to do was make a pile of poorly put together, half thought out videos complaining that Brie Larson said something poorly thought out, and now your whole world is ending.
Well, I'd like to see some numbers, or at least the channel name so I can look it up myself, but he doesn't provide them. Later he says,
My early series of moderate success, Top 5 Reasons It Sucks or Does It, tried to have fun pointing out issues in movies, but the video would also conclude with my honest thoughts on a movie. However, many did not seem to care about those thoughts, and any movie involved in that series would have people just assume I hate it.
If you have issues with a movie, that is criticism. To call back to something I said earlier, I like the Batman, but I have a problem with his character being absolutely stupid in some scenes, and the final twist of the movie being blatant didn't help. But since I give less substantiation for what I think is good than what I think is bad, people are going to assume that I dislike it more than I like it. What a viewer would assume in a video entitled 5 Reasons Why It Sucks or Does It would be 5 points why it's good and 5 points why it's bad, or 3 points why it's good if you like it, and 2 points why it's bad, or 2 points why it's good and 3 points why it's bad if you don't like it. However, since these 5 points are why you don't like it exclusively, of course people are going to assume that you don't like it, because you're not saying any reasons why these things are good. I found this a bit egregious in comparison to the Critical Drinker, considering Critical Drinker basically says his conclusion as the title of the video. And if I were to make an incredibly bad faith take, I'd say that his idea of an honest take is a rating system like Jeremy John's reaction meter or Chris Stuckman's grades, the same way Chaos uses a out of 10 review system. He then claims his opposition is dishonest a few more times and shows his podcast. The conflation of negative with dishonest is a baffling one to me when I first saw the video a few months back. But watching it again, I can see that he doesn't want to say that these channels are bad because it makes him look more hypocritical after having criticized Rags for using ad hominem. I get not wanting to call people idiots because of how subjective movie reviews can be, but there's no shame in calling a reviewer bad if they omit evidence. I think that valid and invalid are more apt words to describe what Organized Chaos wants to say. It has a bit of overlap with true and false and honest and dishonest, but dishonest and honest implies that the person who is doing the action is not just misremembering, but they're actively hiding away information. Being called an idiot implies that the person couldn't help themselves, so it is bound to be seen as more charitable than saying someone is acting in a normal state of mind. I do agree with the fact that this community does have a very negative influence on film reviews, since a lot of people who listen to them don't actually watch the shows or movies in question. But attributing flaws in their reviews as active malice is almost as negative.